stories turn songs into symphonies, events into memories, and lives into legends. In our crowded world, knowing your story cuts through the noise so you can make your mark, whether you want to sell more books, increase profits, or just make a difference. At Sterling & Stone, story is our business. The Story Studio podcast is where we explore ways we can all tell our stories better. And now, with the Story Studio podcast number 13, here's Johnny, Sean, and Dave.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Story Studio podcast. Today we're going to talk about things that we've learned this year, but we're going to frame it around a change in format, basically. So some things are going to change here at the podcast, and for Sterling & Stone in general, although you'll hear more about that later. But we're going to use that as sort of the frame around which we build this sort of lessons learned so far, especially with our reboot. I know what you guys are chuckling about over there.
I'm just in a really good mood lately. I don't know. So many stupid, awesome. We make up stories for a living. I'm lucky and I'm happy to be here. And it's Friday and it's been another really great week. And we didn't record last Friday, right?
We did not, because we were doing something that we can't talk about quite yet.
It was a
week
that we didn't record.
Every week that we don't record is a great week for Dave. So just
actually, I remember we weren't sure because I don't think we'd told the company. Like, I think we'd forgotten. We knew we had this appointment, but it happened really fast, and it was going to be Wednesday, Thursday, and it became Thursday, Friday. And I said, "Oh shit, we didn't tell anybody about the podcast."
Dave had his fingers crossed until the last minute.
Well, so I announced it and to the company, and then I remember talking to Sean. I was like, "Oh, like Dave's gonna not jump up and down with joy."
Well,
I can't jump right now, but yeah.
When Dave jumps, he tears things. That's what happens.
Hey guys, you want an interesting tidbit? I just logged on to Facebook because I was doing the Facebook Live thing, and I saw one of those Facebook memory things, and it said exactly 2 years ago. 2 years ago, I was moving.
Oh!
And it's when I broke my desk apart, where I'd written Unicorn Western and everything. I posted photos of the desk being broken down. So,
I remember that.
Which I used as a secondary desk in my old house, but now needs to go into storage until I have a new house.
Damn. So you moved twice since the podcast?
Yes.
I moved 3 times since the podcast. Dave, how many for you?
I moved from one room to the other.
And how many years does that take?
And when he means moved from one room to the other, he doesn't mean that he conducted the podcast or his office in different rooms. It just means that between shows, he moved from one room and then came back to that room.
I went and got a soda from the fridge, and then I came back here.
Right.
You must be exhausted.
I am. It's a long journey.
Well, okay. So a little behind the scenes stuff. Lately, things are changing very rapidly for us, and we're evolving really quickly. And every time there's some new change or some new iteration, I tell Dave about it, and he's liked all of these. So that tells you that we're going in the right directions, because Dave is, or totally wrong, I'm not really sure, but Dave has been on board with like pretty much everything for a couple months now. Maybe I'd say 100%, but there's always one thing that he adds every time. He's like, okay, well, that's awesome. And it's always, do we have to still keep doing the podcast? Every time.
Do we have to?
Yes, Dave. Yes, we're going to continue to do the podcast. And he's like, damn it. But actually, there is something to that, to what he's saying. And we'll talk about that at the end of the episode.
You do realize that I cannot get out of this contract with Satan until you end this podcast.
Is it because it's binding with us?
Yes.
We own your soul? Do you think I'm going to give that up?
I hope that Satan was involved in drafting that contract in the same way as some of our recent contracts have been held up by lawyerly stuff. Actually, just to give you guys an idea on the whole podcast thing, there's some changes are afoot here, and it would have been really natural to be like, okay, well, we won't do the podcast anymore. And Sean and I both were like, well, obviously we're still doing the podcast just because it's awesome, right? So Dave is on the other side, I guess.
Well, yeah, the podcast for us it's always been a vent. It's always been, I mean, really, our pursuit of the podcast is always going to be to purify it, to make it more of what it was and more of what it can be.
Which
Dave
ironically involves doing less. I mean, I'm not even kidding.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And Dave's ultimate goal is always just to do less, period. Not less for more or less in pursuit of something worthy.
Ideally, I would do this podcast once a month when I was in the mood to.
How do you know?
Dave gets podcast mood once a month.
Yeah, every now and then I'm like, okay, I feel like broadcasting my venom out into the world. Let's
have like wait. That's for another show. This is not your place for venom.
Yeah, no, I'm not talking about this show. I'm talking about the other one. I don't want to do this one at all.
If you're new to the show, welcome.
I love that Dave is so against his will every week. Oh, we love you, Dave.
Life
Dave,
is just a bear trap that he's trying to gnaw his way out of.
Dave, was there ever a time when you really enjoyed this podcast?
Oh, sometimes, like when I'm doing it, I just don't like getting up to do it. It's just such a when I'm actually here, it's all right. It's kind of like walking. Like once I'm doing it, it's all right.
Okay, the proposed company changes. Do you think that will make you like the podcast more?
We'll see.
All right. Okay, the proposed podcast changes. Do you think that will make you like the podcast more?
Again, we'll see.
Do you think that anything will make you like anything more?
We'll see.
I wonder if caramel will make him like apples more, unlike that fateful Christmas gift, that one.
I don't think so.
That trick didn't work.
No.
I think he still has
it's a little like grinding up the peas and putting them in something for the
true
kids.
Story. I actually kept every one of those caramel apples and they're rotting in a box. I'm waiting to send it back to her next year.
Are you serious?
Maybe not.
Why would you even think of that?
Wait, okay. Well, I just realized how far we are from the whole point of this episode. Let's circle on back. Things that we've learned. So, do we want to sort of explain what it is that we're looking to do first, and then explain why it's relevant to things, like why the things that we've learned have caused us to go in this direction?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, we're like a third into the year at this point. We're about ready to roll into May. And we've said for years now, 2018 is our year. And that's taken a slightly different shape than we expected. And so it's really exciting. There has literally not been so much so that I'm even okay using the word literally. There's never been this week or this year a week that hasn't had some amount of substantial change. It's at the point where they're really stacking on each other and they're forcing us to make really good decisions. And they're forcing us to look at our own behavior and look at our own patterns and look at our trajectory, what we've done, what we said we were going to do, what we want to do. And we can see the things that we planned and, okay, well, we were right on there. We were on point. And we could see the places where we're way off the mark. Our compass was pointed here and we're all the way the hell over there. And that's something to figure out, but it's not enough to identify those things. We really have to say, well, what do we do now instead? And how do we change our behavior? Because just outthinking it is so important. I'm reading a book right now. I'm almost done with it. It's one of those books I actually had forever and didn't realize it. Jen recommended it. It's called Black Box Thinking. Johnny, have you read Black Box Thinking?
Black Box Thinking. No.
So it's like black boxes that are in planes, and it talks about how you have to be able to look at your mistakes to make better decisions in the future. And she was talking about this book like over the weekend. And so I went to go buy it, but it was already in my library. And so I was like, okay, awesome. I really should read this. And it is fantastic. And it's all about like the difference between, say, the medical industry and the aviation industry, where the aviation industry uses mistakes to get better and better and better and to constantly iterate, constantly improve. Dave had a one-liner I could see. What is it, Dave? No. All right. So the airline industry is constantly having less crashes and planes are safer over time, where the medical industry, because they have such a culture of fear of admitting mistakes and they have to be right, then they don't learn from their mistakes. They don't report things. And at Sterling and Stone, we are very much about, let's be loud about our mistakes, because as Johnny's very fond of saying, they're only mistakes if you make them twice, right? And we're really good at making mistakes and then figuring out a system to not make that mistake again. And so we've been, pretty good about using those mistakes to teach a wider audience. But what we've been exceptional at is using those mistakes to teach ourselves and our internal team. And then, the small group of Stone Table people who kind of orbit around the team. And so we're getting much better about filtering that and kind of, internally articulating what it is that we did wrong and how to fix it. And so it's just a nice time. Right now, the company is in a huge point of transition where we're shifting the way we fundamentally do a few things. And it's just a good reflection point to stop and take a breath and say, here's some of the big takeaways that we've had so far in this year.
Yeah, I won't go into the detail. Actually, this will be my first point. It's that be willing to pivot, be flexible. Like, I think that's something we've always known. We've actually had to counterbalance the extreme end of that, which was have a rudder, don't pivot so much that you give everybody whiplash. But we've never been afraid of pivoting in kind of substantial ways. The trick is to pivot intelligently. And like Sean was saying, we don't, try not to make the same mistake twice. So I was laughing this weekend. I was, like we were saying just a second ago, I just moved into a new house. And before we moved in, we painted my daughter's room. She wanted a different color. And so I'm sitting there painting and I have nothing else to listen to.
Did she choose black?
Black as Dave's soul was the color that she picked from this Sherwin-Williams aisle.
Black is black. I want my baby back.
Yes. So
It's great.
So
Johnny's reference was better.
I was listening to I didn't have any more podcasts and I didn't have an audiobook that I was really going, and so I listened to
read Black Box Thinking. It's good.
I'm adding it to my Audible right now. I was listening to the Family Business episodes, which is the sort of private podcast we record for the Stone Table. And I listened to the last two episodes, the two most recent ones that Sean and I recorded, and announcing a major pivot. And then in the middle of listening to these two episodes that we had just recorded like 2 weeks before, a week and a half before, I slacked Sean and I said, what's really amusing is listening to the announcement of a major pivot that's already obsolete. It's already obsolete. Like all that pivoting it isn't totally, but it is.
Well, see, but it's not obsolete because the core is the same. What we're changing is the kind of the shape, but not the direction. The direction is,
I would argue that we were going to refine something that we have decided since to get rid of.
All right. Okay. You're right. I think actually
it's like an ice cream place saying we're going to make the best ice cream. We've got a great process, and then the next week saying fuck ice cream.
No, but they're not saying fuck ice cream. They're saying, what makes a lot more sense? There's this really amazing ice cream place. Let's share our recipe. It's more like that.
Okay.
So anyway, squirrel is serving up those scoops. That's all I'm saying.
Right. The idea is being flexible, and I think you have to kind of know when. I don't know. It's a self-honesty. It's a self-awareness sort of thing to understand when something is a whim. Because we used to have a lot of whims before. Like we used to have institutional whiplash where it would be a whim. And now it's not really whims. It's more strategic, but they still happen just as fast. And I think the willingness to basically go in a completely different direction and not think about sunk costs or in literal or sweat equity sorts of costs or mental sunk costs, and just being willing to do that is the sort of thing that I think we're good at as a company. We've done that a few times. We've been like, okay, we're changing the model of this. We're changing the model of this. We're now going in this direction. And we probably look frenetic, but if you follow along, it's really, I think it's much more purposeful. I like to think that it's a little brave.
Can I propose that we change our logo from a unicorn to a squirrel with a unicorn horn?
I actually think that's awesome. I'm totally down with that. A tiny little unicorn horn on a squirrel.
How about a rabid squirrel that has cut the head off of a unicorn and has it in its jaws? Be a good one.
Oh, that's kind of awesome.
Oh, yeah.
You know what we could do on our eventual Sterling and Stone site, which needs like a huge redesign, is like that's exactly it. It could be a squirrel and a unicorn for every imprint, but they do something different. Like the squirrel is thoughtful over at Realm and Sands, and it's just like
that.
foaming at the mouth over at CI, something like that. So, so yeah, I think, I mean, a big one. Okay, well, going back to what you just said about it looks frenetic. I think if you actually build a timeline, hey, you know what we should do? And I'm not even kidding. When Story Shop gets its timeline feature, we could put the timeline of the company, you know, down, because I mean, I know a lot of it is just lost to history. There's no way we can know exactly when.
I'd love to have the iterations of the org chart, but I've been replacing them, and it's absurd.
Well, even in just like, I mean, think about the iterations in the last 90 days of everything that's kind of passed through the company. And I think part of us like jumping all over the place in the last, I don't know, 100 days or so has been because we're in constant pursuit of the best possible solution and solving for the right problem. And I mean, that's just, I think that's something that we really sharpened that saw just from telling stories, right? Because we're always having to do that for our characters. We're having to think their way out of problems, and we're having to solve for the right problems in our story. And I don't know, there's something about solving story problems that just helps you become a better problem solver. At least for me, I feel like, you know, after millions of words of story craft, there's a lot of just general problem solving that comes as part of that. And so if you actually built a timeline of this is all the decisions this year, they do make sense in order. But if you're looking at, you know, if you see one over here and then you skip 9 steps and you go over here, you're like, how did they get from there to there? And I think it's really important to listen to your compass. I'll go next with, you know, one of the biggest things this year by far.
Sorry, just to clarify, I think you said that we should say what we're going to do, and then we didn't actually say it. So do we want to?
That's right. Well, because I was waiting until the end of the episode, but there's no reason for that. So we're not going to be recording live anymore.
Or even really weekly anymore, probably. But you guys will still experience it the same. With the exception of few live viewers, which, you know, that'll change for you guys. But we don't have a large live audience.
Yeah, and that's actually, the live audience has actually shrunk over time, and we haven't done anything to really build it. And the other side of that is that we have to schedule around it. And that doesn't really work for a couple of reasons. First of all, Gabe always has to wake up at 2 p.m. And
well, he's on Eastern time, so he has to wake up at 3.
Yeah, that's too early.
Yeah.
So clearly that's bullshit. And
that
just
is a sacrifice I've been making for far too long.
No, but really we have a lot of things going on, and Friday, I mean, there is something nice about finishing out our week and being able to talk about this stuff, but it's hard, you know, it's definitely hard to make sure that we're always, it's not that, it's making sure that we're scheduled around that when there's a lot of other things going around. And the more important part is we're not necessarily recording when we're at our best, or
when the guests are available. Like, we haven't had any guests on this show. We just had one guest so far, because when we're like, hey, guest, can you be here at 2:15 Central Time on Fridays? And they say no. And we say, well, okay, I guess we won't do it.
Right. There's a certain caliber of guests that we really want to talk to. And it's not reasonable to expect that they can just be available, you know, when we're going to be live. If we can schedule around them a little bit better, you know, we could do things like block scheduling. One thing that Johnny and I have found, we record our family business episodes 2 at a time, back to back. And there's a really narrative flow that happens. We just kind of sink into the episodes, and one leads into the next. And we're always teasing, you know, because we're recording 2 back to back, we know what the second episode is going to be. And we tease that. And then we decide what the third episode is going to be, and we tease that the next time. And then we have a full week to talk about it, and then we record 2 back to back again. And so we want to take a step back and do more storytelling in our packaging, in our almost not seasonal, because that's the wrong language to use here, but it's almost like that, where if you look at a season of something like, you know, Chef's Table or something on on Netflix. They'll have 6 different chefs that they talk to, and each one gets a different episode, and they tell kind of a whole story, right there. So that's the kind of thing we want to be able to do, is to draw a narrative together and say, well, here's, this one topic. Like, one thing that we've talked about doing is books that really every storyteller should read. And they're not going to be the books that you quite think. Like, we're not going to do an episode on Bird by Bird, because I actually don't think that's a book that every writer should read. I think some writers should actively avoid that book. And but there are books that you're probably not thinking about that would really help you become a more substantial storyteller. And so a series would be really cool. A series about, the story that you're telling online when people find you, and the kind of brand that you should be building, whether you're one person creating something or part of a larger team. There's a story being told online when people find you, whether you realize it or not. And, drawing maybe a 6 episode, again, not quite season, but season of, that subject matter. And really,
it's an arc.
It's an arc, and really exploring that. It allows us to elevate the storytelling. This is the Story Studio podcast. We're full-time storytellers, and we want to do a better job with the stories that we tell here. And the way it happens now, because of the live nature of the broadcast, we show up 15 minutes before, the 3 of us kind of warm up together and, hash out, okay, sexy. Well, here's what'd you say, Johnny?
Well, now I have to repeat it in isolation. I said, ooh, sexy.
Maybe I did that on purpose, just because I wanted that reaction.
There you go.
So this will allow us just to be more intentional. And that's really, I think, the most important thing that we can do right now as a company is to be really intentional. And that's my biggest takeaway this year is, the book Essentialism. I think we've recommended that so far this year. I read it last year, and I read it again this year. And this year it actually meant something, actually acting on the behaviors in that book, that it really is about less is more. And we keep asking ourselves internally, are we doing the right things? Are we pointing our intentions in the right places? And just really asking ourselves those questions. And if we take this off of our plate, is the company better? Is the community better? Are we better? And if the answers are yes, 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 then we have to really evaluate, why are we doing those things?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, we want to tell a more do you want to give some examples of sort of some of the stories that we're looking to tell, some of the arcs? You can almost think of them as little mini courses. So one that I keep thinking of that we'll be able to talk about soon, we're not at it yet, but I think would be really interesting to this audience, is TV and film. That's something that we haven't talked a lot about this publicly, and I still can't really give you guys much in the way of details, but we sold an option a while ago. I don't know if that'll ever be made, but we just a week ago sold another one. And this one I think will be made. It feels very, very real. We've been talking on going to these people, and I think that it's a real thing. And then we have another that it looks that basically would have been sold already, but we ended up changing the deal on that. And there's a lot of things in the works as far as TV and film. We've learned a lot. We have an entertainment lawyer, and we have a lot of people that are kind of like partners now that we can talk to about this. And I think that would be something that this audience might be interested in hearing about. But doing that in a series makes much more sense than like us giving, because what we've done in the past is we'll give you an update and then we'll say, well, we'll follow up on that later. And then, 20 episodes later, we might mention something again, but there's no kind of rhyme or reason. And so what we're looking at now is kind of thinking ahead of time and saying, okay, so let's say you want to get your film optioned. Well, what sorts of things are optioned? Because these people, they flew into town last week and stayed 2 days, and Sean and I just talked to them nonstop.
That's why we didn't record last week.
That's why we didn't record last week. And they're very connected in Hollywood, in that world. And so one of the things that was so interesting to them is as we reeled off things, they were like, oh, like you are writing stuff that is kind of meant for TV, even before it was officially meant for TV, which is how we're writing some of the newer stuff. And so we could talk about what that means to be something that is suitable for adaptation to TV or film, and then we could have, you know, some of these other people on as guests, and you know, our attorney might come on to talk about what sorts of things you maybe look out for in a contract. Like, we could tell that whole story, and I think it'd be really interesting.
Yeah, and instead of having like a big round table, you really do cut it into smaller pieces, because the learning is going to be better. And as we experience, this show has always been at its best. We have always been at our best when we're just sharing our process. When that's it. It's just, hey, this is what's worked for us, and watch out, there's a landmine over there.
And like, we're just kind of having fun.
Right. And so we're really trying to peel back the layers right now and think, how can we add more value, and how can we have more fun, and how can we become better storytellers in this, if we're going to do this podcast, which it's not even really up for debate whether or not we do the podcast and all the things that are moving right now.
Except for Dave.
We want to do the podcast. This is exciting to us, except for Dave. but
some of us want to do a podcast.
Well, do you remember when Dave left last week and we still managed to carry on? We could do that again.
We should spend a day with Dave driving, so he'll say lots and lots of things, and then just use them all as sound bites. I bet we'd have enough for like 3 years before people even knew that he wasn't here.
Awesome. That sounds like a plan.
They see, he doesn't even take that as a knock.
No.
Like, why can't we do this? So everything that we're doing right now is very intentional. It's very much in pursuit of making everything better. Our biggest goal right now is fiction, for sure. Like, it's got to be fiction first. It's got to be our stories first, but we're finding ways to make everything else also better than it was before. And building the right teams to support that, because right now we don't have them, and we just keep telling ourselves that we do.
Right. What are the other things with this that we've learned this year that have sort of led to this? Focus?
Yeah, well, focus was kind of our big word for the year, and we haven't flinched from that at all.
Yeah, I mean, focus is, and I actually think it works with mine, but increasingly over the last few weeks, and this is something we can tell you about in coming months as well, is, for me, it's been leverage. Like, leverage also means leaning into superpowers. You know, let's do what we do best, but then let's leverage everything else so that it's minimal input and maximal output. But focus is a part of this.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about these earlier in another episode, but they're absolutely worth digging into a little bit. One is just staying in our lane. You know, how important it is to really, really just be good at what you are good at, and it's not that you shouldn't try new things, because every single thing that we've tried has, in a very circular way, brought us back to exactly where we need to be. And that's a really fantastic place to be. But we're getting better at knowing exactly what we should be focused on. It's not just that we're good at focusing, it's that we have to focus on the right things. And we've never had quite the right body in front of us. And, you know, this was the first time where we were explaining kind of our new models and what we figured out. And we took it to our accountant, Johnny and I, this last Monday. And he's like, okay, so we're talking core competencies here, right? He was very happy about the things that we're talking about, because it's us being stronger as a company and doing what we're good at, and not trying to, boil the ocean, which we have tried to. And so that's good. It means that our learning will get more targeted and stronger, because by doing fewer things, we'll be doing better things.
Right. Anything else?
Well, I like the use the whole animal thing. That's been a big thing that we've.
Although honestly, you said backing away a little bit from the need to use the whole animal.
No, absolutely. I think we still use the whole animal, but that's the wrong analogy, because then I have a whole bunch of explaining to do.
Just like Lucy.
No, I still think every single place we can use the whole animal. But if you look at like the one big thing that we just killed, by necessity, we'll still be able to use all of the animal just in a very different way. But again, there I go. Like I can't, there's not much I can say about that. But no, I firmly believe we use the whole animal. And originally when we were talking about that, it's just that you don't waste anything. You don't have, when you have a project, there are ways to market the project. There are ways to build the project. There are ways to share the project. There are ways to do any of this stuff. And, you have to explore it ahead of time so that you get all of the pieces. So like if you have, just to bring this down to a very simple example, if you're a solo author, when you're telling your story, there are already the pieces that you need for the extra materials that will keep your readers really engaged and, coming back for more. In your story, there are elements where, okay, now if I go deeper into this part, I can create the separate story and engage them that way. Whatever your business is, there are things that you're wasting. There are, whether there are employees that could be doing, other kinds of work that really make them sing. And maybe that's another one to really lean into. It's a little bit superpower, but we found it in some very specific ways. Knowing what your company is good at, knowing what you as a person are good at, knowing what your collaborators are good at. And what we found, we have a lot of writers that we're working with right now, and many of them were not writing the right genre. They were not writing the right things. They were wasting so much of their time writing because they weren't going to find success in the genres that they were writing in because they didn't really know who they were as authors, or what they had to offer their ideal reader, or how to communicate with their ideal reader. And so it was only a matter of taking the time to explore that and find out who you are as a person is who you are as an author. And it's finding the ideas that you could best communicate in a commercial way that's going to help you draw the most audience. So, putting that together is essential for an author, but it happens all over the place. We just hired a human resources person who is fantastic. And that's because Johnny did a really excellent job of finding out who exactly this person would be before we brought her on board. And there is a lot of narrative that happens there. It's a lot of asking the right questions and knowing what we want and then building the path to get it.
So anyway, there's not, let's recap a little bit of what to expect. If you're a feed listener, if you're a non-live listener, there's going to be very little difference for you, except that you're going to get a more coherent narrative in the podcast. It'll still air. It'll still be called the Story Studio Podcast. It'll still show up on the same day.
Yeah, if you missed this episode, no big deal.
Right, it doesn't really matter for you guys. It will, and it'll be every week. Maybe less religiously than in the past, because there are some times when it doesn't work, and we may miss a week here or there, but mostly every week. But there'll be no live component for those of you who like to tune in live. I'm sorry. This is going to result in a better show, though. We kind of can't serve both masters. We can't have the firm dedication to a predictable time slot, and a shuffling time slot doesn't make any sense to you guys. We can't do that and cover the ground that we want to cover. We can't plan accordingly. We can't have guests. We can't have the flexibility to say, okay, something came up that we want to delve deeper into. We can't explore new relationships in the same ways. So, that's basically it. You're going to get a more, I think, interesting and helpful arc to the podcast, but the schedule really shouldn't change very much for absolutely most of you. So anything to add before we close up?
It's so hard.
No, other than I'm really excited about the changes, and I think they're all really positive.
For those of you who were disappointed in the last episode when we said something about saying goodbye and Dave did not sing Boys to Men, you got it this time. So it's good. If you wait long enough, he's going to sing some lyrics. It's good stuff.
I'm all about the Boys to Men.
I saw Boys to Men on I think a Geico commercial recently, and I was like, well, they got old. So did we, but still, it was just like,
okay, I know we need to end.
Now they're men to men.
Now
they're men to old men.
When you've made all your money, why are you doing Geico commercials? Like, you've got enough money. Why are you embarrassing yourself?
Why do you think they won't need more money?
Well, don't they have enough? Like to go make a Geico commercial?
They're
Come
not making.
No, did you?
Okay.
And
musically
celebrities
relevant.
generally aren't known for being intelligent with their
much
money.
Do you know how much money they made back then?
Not enough.
Do you remember when Mike Tyson or MC Hammer got his mansion, repossessed basically, like with his solid
the
gold
government
gates?
takes all your fucking money. That's
okay.
Why.
All right.
What's a rainy day? I don't know what those are.
Okay. I don't understand. Say, Sam Jackson doing those Citibank commercials. I just don't understand them. I'm like, dude, you make tons of money for every movie. Why are you shilling credit cards?
What
like,
about Matthew McConaughey with his Cadillac endorsement?
Well, at least that's cool. Like he at least looks cool as opposed to shilling a car. But for me, if I was an actor, I wouldn't do endorsements like that.
What's Jennifer Garner do? It's an airline, right?
Yeah, Jennifer Garner does.
She's doing some
she does L'Oreal.
She does a credit card too.
Yeah, no, L'Oreal would make sense. This one was something.
I highly oppose celebrities endorsing credit cards and consumer debt. I think that's just shit.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Like fucking Citibank, Samuel Jackson. Like I just don't understand it. Jennifer Garner has beautiful skin. I understand why she would do skin. I get that. And like Brad Pitt doing Japanese whiskey or whatever, I get that because that he looks cool and that sells whiskey. But like consumer debt, that seems like a really
Dave should get in the endorsement deal endorsing skin. I could just see a whole human skin trade.
No, I want to endorse suicide.
Ooh.
Like just suicide machine.
There you go.
Dr. Kevorkian suicide.
Dave's
machine.
got a suicide hotline and it's not what you expect.
Oh shit, let's write that. Suicide hotline.
All right. So
that's an awful way to go. We can edit that out, right?
No, I think
I like
that's,
all the
that's well, do you remember when we talked about the dead baby on Christmas in one of the first episodes? That's just trimming your tribe right there. All right. So thanks everybody for listening to the Story Studio. Again, next week we won't be live. But you'll catch us on the feed at the same time. And I assume YouTube the same basic schedule. So we'll have to figure that out. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Story Studio podcast. Are you wondering what the ever-growing demand for superb storytelling skills means for your future? Check out our latest interview as Johnny and Sean dive deep into that question in Storytelling is the Future, How to Build on Your Self-Publishing Success. Download the interview from the info box or show notes in YouTube, or head over to sterlingandstone.net/future.